Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jeff Brook, and I'm the Scientific Director of CANU, the Canadian Urban Environmental Health Research Consortium, and an Associate Professor at the University of Toronto in the Dalla Lana School of Public Health and the Department of Chemical Engineering and Applied Chemistry. I wish to acknowledge this land in which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Today, we're going to have a conversation with leaders from 3 projects that have been funded through the Canadian Institutes for Health Research's Environments and Health Signature Initiative. Now that the initiative is coming to an end, we thought it would be a good opportunity to take stock of what is achieved in terms of research findings, policy relevant knowledge, and key insights, and to do it in a more relaxed format, having a conversation, as I've said. So I hope that you'll enjoy this sort of format. We'll talk about the research for about an hour, and then we'll have some time afterwards for questions. So please put your questions in the chat during the event, and we'll do our best to try to summarize and get to them at the end. Just some background, the Environment and Health Signature Initiative was a major thrust from CIHR that supported 18 projects across 3 areas: gene-environment microbiome interactions, intersectoral prevention, and data platforms. Additionally, to focus the research attention, CIHR put forth 3 nexus areas that also facilitate more integrated transdisciplinary research. And these were urban form, resource development, and agri-foods. The 3 intersectoral prevention projects we'll hear about today target the resource development nexus area of the initiatives. And this is the second in a series of 6 webinars that we'll host over the next month that highlight these projects and will hopefully bring some good insight for our audience. Our upcoming webinars are on obesity and the environment on March 27th, microbiome on March 29th, child health on April 3rd, and agri-foods on April 5th. And you can register for all of these webinars at the CANU website, canu.ca/webinars. The insights presented in these webinars will serve as a foundation for discussions at the upcoming Environments and Health Research Summit that we're holding in Ottawa, April 17 to 18, that many of you may know about. That will have options for virtual attendance and for invitation-only personal attendance. We're very pleased that we are presenting these webinars in partnership with the National Collaborating Center for Environmental Health, which is one of 6 national collaborating centers for public health, and is a leader in knowledge translation and exchange for environmental health practitioners and policymakers. A recording of today's webinar will be sent to everyone who registered and will be posted on the CANU and the NCCEH websites. So before we get started, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cameras and stay on mute during the event. Our projects today are, first, a shared future, achieving strength, health, and autonomy through renewable energy developments for the future. And this is led by 2 of our attendees here today, Dr. Heather Castledon, who is a professor and the President's Impact Chair in Transformative Governments and Planetary Health at the University of Victoria. And also with her is Dr. Diana Lewis, who is a member of the Spey-Kuniku-T-Mi'kmaq First Nation in Nova Scotia. And she's also an assistant professor and Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Environmental Health Governance at the University of Guelph. The next project that we have a team from is the ECHO Network, Environment Community Health Observatory, strengthening intersectoral capacity to understand and respond to health impacts of resource development. And with us are Dr. Margot Parks, a professor at the University of Northern British Columbia School of Health Sciences and co-lead of the UNBC Health Research Institute. And with her is Dr. Sandra Allison, Medical Officer of Health at the Vancouver Island Health Authority, and Dr. Raina Fumerton, Public Health Physician and the Northwest Medical Health Officer at Northern Health. And last but not least, we're going to be hearing about the project that's entitled Patterns of Resilience Among Youth in Context of Petrochemical Production and Consumption in the Global North and Global South. And representing this project is Dr. Michael Unger, who is the founder and director of the Resilience Research Center at Dalhousie University, where he holds the Canada Research Chair in Child, Family, and Community Resilience, and also Lola Strand, who's a community services manager at the town of Drayton Valley, Alberta. I think you can see from the breadth of those who are coming to represent these projects and the clear, deep partnerships they represent that these projects have had I think a great run in terms of building capacity and much learning. And so I really look forward to our conversation today. I just want to remind you again to mute your speakers, turn your cameras off as we get started. So I'm going to turn my first question to Dr. Parks and team, and I want to really just have us all get a background on what the work did. So I'd like, if you could, Margot, just tell us a bit more about sort of critical scientific questions that motivated the research directions that your team pursued in the EHSI.
Thanks, Jeff. In the spirit of teamwork, I'm handing that straight to Sandra Ellison. Over to you, Sandra.
Thanks a lot, everybody, and good morning from the sunny and traditional and ancestral territory of the Nanaimo people here in Nanaimo, BC, on Vancouver Island, where I'm a medical health officer. And as a public health physician, I'm very interested in how environments impact the health of the population, both social environments, natural environments, built environments, and how our own impacts related to resource development impact the health of the population. We founded our work really in the applied public health dilemmas of Northern British Columbia and the realities of rural communities. Rural communities are incredibly diverse. When you know one rural community, you know one rural community. You can't, let's say, generalize in many, many situations, but yet there's a need for a resource development evidence base that supports policymakers and decisions that are made that impact communities. In early 2014, I started work in the Northern British Columbia area, Northern Health, and began understanding the really critical context that people were living in and dependent on. So dependent upon their environments, just like a goldfish is dependent on the water in the goldfish bowl. And I really want to just emphasize that, because quite often if we don't pay attention to that water and that environment that we're in, we actually become accustomed to it. In my role as a public health specialist, I became really curious about how to go forward with this. And it was very fortunate that I knew Margot. And Margot and I began work on a number of different, let's say, small initiatives that were driven by small grants. And it became really obvious that the partnership that could grow between the academia, the opportunities that resource development literature offered, because there were so many gaps. We had so much information that we needed to fill. And that was so important to our research partnership, because I had questions that I couldn't answer as a public health specialist because I didn't have the resources, the team to answer them. And sometimes I needed a little bit arm's length protection. And that's when our collaboration really, I think, got a lot of wind under its wings. And so the questions, I think the critical questions that motivated this are really, how does resource development impact both positively and negatively populations that live in communities? And there's wild swings in what those offerings are. So, we have boom and bust cycles that communities experience to this day, and really exacerbated by situations like our recent pandemic. So I think I'll stop there. Yeah, anything to add from my partners here?
Yeah, I think as we were talking about, Sandra, it's in the title of the Eco Network that this is a capacity strengthening. It's about strengthening capacity. And that has meant that it's a boundary crossing effort across generations, across jurisdictions, across disciplines, across territories. And importantly, my work grounded, as Sandra said, we began our work together in Lheidli territory. I happen to be in the same territory as Sandra right now as I speak, but that boundary crossing element of the different contextual lessons from the different places, we had a team from across Canada. So, and it's wonderful. We've got some of our team members here. I almost feel like wanting to wave, get you to wave, but that's one of the reasons I've got this circle behind me, which is that this sort of conversation is a continuation of the circles of conversations we had in a lot of different territories and a lot of different places, convening moments to not try to solve these issues. This was not research that was intended to answer the bits of to focus on the thing. It was about how to strengthen capacity in the future for these forever challenges to continue to be able to push and learn from the different contexts and we're working. So you're going to hear although we were anchored in particular locations, New Brunswick, Alberta, across British Columbia, leaning into Northern Ontario, we also have had this, one of the things that bound us together was partners like Sandra, like Raina, as you'll learn, who wanted to work more closely and learn together with people, not just from the health sector, but for the environment and the community health sector. So that was the origins that drove this kind of boundary crossing work. And to the point of EHSI as a signature initiative that was bringing together teams, it was relatively unprecedented. It enabled us to operate in ways that were responding to applied dilemmas. And that's a very important message, that this was not just business as usual research, understanding little siloed pieces of information. It was elevating, connecting, and amplifying. So those are some of our key messages we want to start with.
Yeah, amazing. I'm really always impressed with what ended up getting put into the research that was funded by the EHSI, and how CIHR, I think, really got it and sort of directing things. And I think you've really spoken to this, both of you, but is there anything else you wanted to say about, what would have happened if you didn't have this opportunity from the EHSI? There was clearly an opportunity there, a need. Was EHSI totally essential? Any more you want to add about that?
Well, and then the obvious answer is yes, in the sense that we were working together in this way. What we need in this kind of, to strengthen capacity in this world, in this work, to learn from the tools and processes we were learning from, we need to be able to connect and amplify. And that is work that does not happen routinely. None of our institutions are well designed to do that. So we were learning together across institutional boundaries that wouldn't have happened naturally, and it requires people power to bring that to life. And it's a research challenge, it's a change challenge, and as we'll emphasize, this is a team grant that matters. I felt proud to be funded for a team grant for this length of time, and that's that kind of funding to do this boundary crossing work, which was part of the call, how to do intersectoral prevention. Like this doesn't happen routinely. So investment to tackle things that wouldn't happen otherwise is really important in a research and learning realm. And I'm sure we'll give other examples later, and other teams will as well.
Great, yeah. Capacity building was a key thing, I think, in intersectoral prevention around urban form in our previous webinar. I want to turn to Heather and Diana, and maybe you can share with us from your work and the shared future on some of your key objectives, and again, what was sort of the real key role that the EHSI played in enabling this to happen. So if Heather or Diana wants to go, but happy to hear from you.
Just unmute there, Dee. Yeah.
Hi there, Jeff. I'll go first. So Nin Delawisi, Diana Lewis, Delewi Sabeganagadig, Akmi'kmaq. So I'm from Sabeganagadig First Nation. It's a really difficult name to pronounce. In Mi'kmaq, as the Atlantic provinces of Canada. I'm joining you from the ancestral lands of the Attawattaran and the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit in Ontario. So what I wanted to say is shared futures about reconciliation between knowledge systems. It has been foundational to our work together. From that premise, the call was for resource development, and we didn't want to focus on the historically extractive, harmful energy systems out there. So we considered the emerging field of renewable energy as our chosen platform for exploring reconciliation and moving towards healing our relationships with each other and with the world around us. We thought, or we had hoped, that this space was a fertile ground for reconciliation. And so I'll pass it over to Heather.
Yeah, thanks, Dee. Just to add a little bit to that and maybe explain a little bit of what you're seeing on your screens. Our goal, like Dee said, has been to bring forward stories of reconciliation and healing in intersectoral partnerships under this umbrella of renewable energy. And so we have 8 thematically linked projects across the country that have been studying various aspects of intersectoral partnerships, but with an overall focus on Indigenous peoples' leadership in renewable energy. And the center circle in that image, what you see there is, it draws inspiration from the work that we brought in an elder as a key leader in our work together, because we were the only project funded under the Indigenous Ways of Knowing stream. And we chose renewable energy as our focus between the 3 potential areas. But our elder, Barbara Dumont Hill from Kittakinzibi, Anishinaabe territory, helped us with a conceptual framework that was drawing on her Anishinaabe teachings of the 4 elements. So that's what you see in the center circle there, the energy that comes from the sun, the wind, the water, and the earth. And Elder Barbara has been a guiding teacher throughout our work. We've called on her during very difficult times and have really leaned into her teachings about coming together in the spirit of love and healing, truth-telling and respect, and humility, I think is all part of kind of who we are and what we're trying to do. And then we also had as a key member of our team, and obviously still do because we're still underway, Simon Brascape, who's an artist, an academic, an activist, and he helped us, along with his daughter, who's also an artist, come up with visual representations of the 8 projects that helped us talk through what are, or how are these very different projects actually thematically linked across these 4 elements. And so that's kind of the image that you see there that we might have a chance to speak to during the webinar. And you had asked another question, Jeff, about sort of how important was this funding, and maybe I'll turn it back to Dee on that front.
Great, thanks, Heather. The funding was absolutely critical and absolutely not possible without the EHSI initiative. Renewable energy research is typically funded by NSERC or SHRC, and doing it through CIHR allowed us to study in a holistic way how land and environment are interconnected. Land, environment, and health, are interconnected. And we really are very supportive that funding should be ongoing for this kind of research. In one of the projects, we focus on energy as a determinant of health with Tobic First Nation, Negatok, who are involved in solar, wind, hydro, and getting into biomass. And in another project in British Columbia, we were able to focus on the connection between energy and food sovereignty. The project is called From the Ocean Floor to the Mountaintop, using renewable energy of Mother Earth to grow. And so in this case, they used solar energy that has allowed the First Nation to power greenhouses. Heather?
Yeah, I think the only other thing that I might say just around a shared future in terms of its structure of governance was something else that we really wanted to flip the narrative of the way funding agencies think about a nominated principal investigator sort of driving the whole program. And that's why you see us together today co-presenting. Dee and I are the co-directors of Shared Future, but throughout our entire governance structure, because we were funded under the Indigenous stream, but also because those of us who are non-Indigenous like myself really embrace the UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, free, prior, and informed consent and Indigenous self-determination. And so in doing this research, it was absolutely critical that at least 50% of the team, whether it's the programmatic structure or each of the projects, at least 50% of the people in those decision-making roles identified as Indigenous. And this was the first time that a funding call, I think, had such a strong emphasis on gender champions. And so we also ensured that, again, our team as a whole had at least 50% of each decision-making aspect of our team be self-identifying women. So I'll leave it at that. There's lots of other novel insights that have come up as we moved forward that I think we'll speak to, but I'll pass it over to you, Jeff.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much. It's beautiful pictorial there, with circles within circles within circles, and it's great to see. I'm trying to move things right along. I'll turn to Michael and Lola, so you could fill us in on sort of your overall objectives and what you hope to achieve, and get us all. It was sort of really good for us, I think, all to think at the beginning about why did you do this research? And
sure.
I think both groups have spoke to that really well now. So yeah, sort of why did you do this research and what did you try to achieve?
Well, thanks, Jeff. What an inspiring, it just kind of creates the momentum. I'm on the East Coast. Lola, of course, is in Drayton Valley, Alberta, one of the research sites. And what's not being sort of represented here, of course, is our other major, very much a equal representation would be also with our South African colleagues, very, very large and extremely amazing team down there that are working out of Secunda and University of Pretoria. Just from timing wise, wasn't possible to coordinate this. But we sort of started with this, really trying to understand this idea of multi-systemic resilience, this idea that to create quote unquote a well-functioning set of folks and youth specifically, you'd have to think across multiple systems and how these cascade and affect one another. And what we began to do was we entered specifically as part of the study. As it emerged, we kind of began to really dig in and focus most on communities that were dependent on oil and gas production or processing. And this is, of course, the foundation stone of the economy in Drayton Valley, but also in Secunda. They are the epicenter of Sasol, which basically takes coal and turns it into petrochemical products, which is, and indeed is, one of the, if not the most polluted place in the Southern Hemisphere. So where the research kind of really went was this impact, of course, of when you're heavily involved in resource extraction and processing industries, in this case, oil and gas, what's the impact on individuals? But of course, that's not really where the research was, because we're focused on resilience. So we're really talking about how these communities who are experiencing economic boom and bust cycles, and the dramatic influence of these industries on young people's, everything from their family dynamics to their career decisions, to their levels of depression and anxiety, physical health outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. And we had these contrasting communities. Drayton Valley and Secunda do not look at all alike. They are different parts of the economy, if you will, in terms of oil and gas extraction. But there were some fascinating lessons that, as we went along, that I think we're kind of a unique study in that regard, that we began to ask questions like, how can these communities be, quote unquote, sustainable as the world is transitioning to a decarbonized economy? And indeed, what's been the impact of boom and bust economic cycles and this kind of what has sometimes been in a derogatory way called a resource curse of the compulsion to stay with these industries. So all of those factors were part of the conversation. And actually, I was just very pleased. I was just in Drayton Valley. We were doing a huge community event with all the town council, lots of youth participation, talking about the future of youth in these communities, and indeed how these communities can transform, but also sustain. Lola, do you want to talk at all, introduce the study from your perspective at all as a community member?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really interesting last few years working on this project. As Mike mentioned, we are in the heart of oil and gas community here. Sorry, I'm getting some noise from the other room here.
Okay.
So our community is heavily reliant on the oil and gas industry. Where we are celebrating 70 years actually of oil and gas industry here, and the well-being of the community and the people in it are very much dependent on it. So to look towards a future of oil and gas production being eliminated and going green here is a really, really difficult conversation to have here. And what this project has done is open up that conversation about, you know, maybe we need to plan for that future. The community depends on it, and the future of youth depend on that. So from a community perspective, that's what this research has done is back a few years ago, those conversations were just not had. And now they're being had. We had some really tricky conversations back the other night. There are conversations that do need to happen, and we've brought youth into those conversations. So it's pretty exciting. We've been working on this for a long time, but I think now is the most exciting moment because we're going to start seeing the impacts of the research on the community going forward.
Just before I pass it back to Jeff, I'll one very few things. I mean, long before this term just transitions, which has now taken the center stage global, you know, long before that term came to vogue, we were doing this research. We were like 5 years in front of that concept in a sense of how this was emerging. And by the way, Lola, you know, I never forgave you. You kicked me under the table at a council meeting early in our project because I was about to say the word diversification of the economic diversity. I was about to say the word, I got to the D in the word, and she literally kicked me under the table to not say that at town council. Now this, what, back in like 2015, 16, when we were starting. And the other day we had a town council meeting on diversification with our research front and center. And you never kicked me in that time. So anyway.
I do not. The community is now, thanks to the research, the community and town council is ready to have conversations about diversification. So you're allowed to say it now.
Yeah, well, I mean, thanks for, you know, just sort of adding that last part there, Michael. I couldn't help hearing all of them to just get a sense that they're all 5 years ahead, if not more, in the thinking. And just now, in a perfect place for the questions that are remaining and are deeply challenging for all of us to deal with. So there's so much promise to build from where things are at. And I think it's pretty clear. I don't need to bug you about this, but this is something just really couldn't have come to this extent without the EHSI to build the team and understand the important upfront investments that everybody's made. I want to move to the sort of next question, and it's really not like what did you find, what are your key things, but I think you touched on elements of these already. All of you did, but it's sort of as as the work was unfolding and the partnerships were coming along, it's invariable that new insights emerge, and they may be relevant to you or the research teams, the research thinkers, could be considered important to your audiences, whether they're policymakers or other advocacy groups. But in that sort of context of as you're starting to really dig into things deeper and understanding more what you got yourself into, are there some? I'll turn to Margot first, or maybe not.
We're handing this question to again. This, as Heather mentioned, this teamwork is really important, and we've had, as we'll talk about, Sandra was the first co-lead from Northern Health, and it was a really amazing journey to begin. And part of the amazing journey was then to continue that with Raina Farmerton, both as medical officers of health and public health physicians, embodying that partnership piece as we've progressed. So over to you, Raina, for this question.
Thanks, Margot. That's very kind. So yeah, thanks for the great question, and good morning. Well, it's morning here still, at least, from beautiful Terrace, British Columbia, which is located in the northwestern part of British Columbia on the ancestral territory of the Tsimshian people. I think, you know, I could go on for hours on this question, but I think just in respect for time, and I'll focus on just a kind of a couple of, you know, insights around complexity and messiness, I guess, would be the first. And then secondly, you know, turnover and succession planning and sustainability of, you know, trying to deal with messy issues, trying to navigate really, you know, multi-year, multi-jurisdictional projects such as the ECHO network. So just on the issue of kind of complexity and messiness, you know, one of the things that I really appreciated about this research endeavor was that it paid attention to the applied context. And so that applied, useful, like practical nature of this endeavor was very important to me. The complexity and the messiness of community health and resource development, which has been eloquently spoken to by others already this morning, it's a real and it's an everyday struggle that we face here in Northern Health as frontline public health practitioners. And you know, despite it being fraught with all that messiness, that didn't scare Margot and her research team at UNBC. So it was really refreshing because, you know, we're often knee deep in the murkiness of really complicated issues that are so multifactorial in nature and require that intersectoral kind of collaboration. You know, the issue of health and resource development, the issue of the toxic drug crisis, climate change, like I could go on, and they're so complicated it can be paralyzing. So it was so wonderful and refreshing to have like academics that were ready to wade into this messy issue and you know, collaborate on things like guidelines, reports, and publications that like my team were actually able to use as frontline public health. That was sort of a key way that Northern Health has been able to collaborate with academics to find answers to questions that we as a health authority have been actively struggling with for years. And then I guess just briefly, the second point would be around turnover and succession planning and the sustainability of our impact. And so, you know, Margot spoke to this, the breadth of geographical kind of representation and membership that we've had in this network. ECHO has progressed through multiple turnovers of individuals, as well as people shifting within and between organizations. I'm not sure if this would hold true for some of the other speakers and projects that are here today. And what was really great was, you know, how we in Northern Health sort of as one of the regional cases demonstrated its commitment through multiple transitions. I mean, Margot alluded to, you know, Sandra being the initial, her and Margot being the initial brainchild of this project, and then as Sandra moved on to another sort of chapter in her work life, I was already involved in the project since day one as part of the regional case, and then I became the principal knowledge user. And there are many examples of that as well. You know, in the New Brunswick case, we have someone who started off sort of as in a coordinator role for a regional case, and now they're the executive director. So so yeah, I think I guess one of the key insights from the Northern BC case and ECHO as a whole, pardon me, in this 5-year project is the extent of movement within and between organizations. And that's just a fact of not only, you know, research grants and 5-year projects, but, you know, it's a challenge and a reality of trying to tackle any complex sort of issue, such as what we're discussing today, and the need to plan for this to ensure the sustainability of our efforts. And, you know, a lot of things that work out really well do so because of that, that right balance between good processes and structures to enable that sustainability, but also on strong relationships. So, processes in isolation don't create those relationships. And if you depend solely on relationships, it leaves you very vulnerable to turnover, which is inevitable. So I think, you need to build those relationships with people, but things need to be anchored beyond people. And even when it comes to the people, you need to be more than one person deep within organizations to ensure that sustainability. You can't have sort of isolated leads without a succession plan. So as mentioned, many people moved on or changed roles, but many actually stayed on. Some left and returned in different capacities in different organizations. So you might be able to check out temporarily from ECHO, but you can never leave. So I just welcome Sandra and Margot if you'd like to add anything, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear more from you about, you talked about the complexity and the real challenges, but needing to wade into that to really make any progress. And there were ways you think that concept or other insights led to some, new ways that the project evolved that were really fruitful? Margot, Sandra?
Yeah, I mean, it's this idea of having the longer time window for funding offered a really important window of the real world cycles that are happening in institutions. So intersectoral action can be some sort of abstract, fancy idea, but actually it means people working together over time across changes in these very complex issues. And so it actually, what we had a hunch it might happen, but it actually ended up emerging as actually a real strength of the project, where you're actually cultivating the capacity to move across boundaries, to be able to carry your knowledge from the health sector into the community sector, into the environment sector in different roles in your organizations. And this idea of cross-fertilization, I can't emphasize enough the power of, we had 2 health authorities in our project that were really key partners, Northern Health and First Nations Health Authority. We had the Battle River Watershed Alliance, and we had New Brunswick Environment Network. These are very different organizations. They're not at the same scale. They're environment and community and health organized. And across, we often used to joke that one of the actions when ECHO really took place was in the operations team, we called it, where it was the regional case coordinators from each of those cases talking to each other about the reality of doing intersectoral work in their day jobs. Because all of these abstract ideas can be really great, but somebody's day job has to change to actually move on these issues. Somebody needs to do something differently in how they approach their work. And so that how meant that one of the richest teams, we really found it quite difficult to surface the depth of insights that those team members who met on a monthly basis, and they were sharing across sectors and contexts in ways that were very common. So, that crew, and that was one of those crews where people moved on and then they would return to those meetings because they were such fruitful meetings in terms of creating a safe space to talk about these messy issues. So it meant that we got to think about accountability in different ways. It's a really powerful paper by a member of our team who lent into this idea of accountability. That surfaced some pretty challenging, confronting issues for us all in this space. So I might paste a couple of links into the chat box as we progress about some of the papers that, or not just papers, but ways in which we've manifest this commitment to not seeing boundary crossing and succession as a challenge, but actually part of doing the work that we need capacity for. I'm sure, Sandra, you might have other thoughts there, but so I'll hand back to you.
I'll try to be really brief. Jeff, thanks so much. This is a really great question. I think in the landscape that we work in as public health specialists and medical health officers, it is a regulatory landscape. And so by nature, legislation and regulations are defined silos, really, and areas of responsibility and mandates. And this project really pushed us to ask our partners to work differently, come to the table differently, look at these cumulative impacts. And I think that that's something that our region and the project really sought to understand and perhaps bring tools and processes forward so that we could take notice of these cumulative impacts in relatively small geographies, but over a long period of time where, you know, they're hidden, they're out of sight, and out of sight, out of mind. That's really one of the observations that we have. And if we are not consciously taking notice of the things that are going around us, and that's each of us in our roles, and public health really does have a bit of a watchman stance there and looking over things. And that's really what we sought to take, you know, an advantage of in some ways in this project, to say, like, how do we do this differently? Because we can see, without having good monitoring processes, good collaborative tables, opportunities to speak to each other about the different actions that we're taking and how it impacts each other and the health of the population, you know, it was a missed opportunity. So I feel like we've created new tables, we've created new language, we've created new tools, and without this project, that wouldn't have been able. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I could just sort of feel like and sense how in your hearts you just felt like things were coming together. You were able to have these extended, you know, discussions and act upon what was surfacing in these insights, and that's great. It's certainly turning to Heather and Diana. You know, again, you know, bridging, you know, ways of knowing and knowledge. Again, just feels right in your heart. And what sort of insights did you get as the project unfolded that may have changed things, or, you know, led to new ideas that you went off on a different initiative? I'm sure there were many, but are there a few highlights in that area that you thought about?
I'll go first. Thanks. So not a new insight, but nevertheless, probably just as shocking and important to policymakers, informative for research direction, and informative to forming partnerships with Indigenous communities, is that colonialism is alive and systemic and damaging as it ever was and always has been. And within the renewable energy sector, we see it embedded. We've seen it embedded in industry, government, and proponents. Unfortunately, the ball is still in their court and they know it. The system, it maintains the status quo of capitalism, settler colonialism, white supremacist mentalities. And unfortunately, existing energy policy is embedded within a colonial capitalist economy in Canada. And I thought maybe we would just share two quotes that we gathered from our experience that sort of convey this. In one interview, it was shared that the participant said, "I'd say at this point in time, UNDRIP and the TRC haven't affected how we do business. Even if there is a large success in delivering on UNDRIP or the TRC calls to action, or the TRC calls could make significant headway, I don't know that I can envision a situation where that significantly impacts how we go about business." And then another comment was made, First Nations want to be financially sovereign and governmentally sovereign, but they also know that as long as they depend on utilities for power, utilities have got them by the balls. So I handed it over to Heather.
I feel like that's where we say mic drop, because I think it also relates to what we're hearing from the other EHSI projects. It may be some food for thought for Michael and Lola and your context around this whole notion of a just transition. If we don't take seriously the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and Indigenous sovereignty and Indigenous ways of knowing, we're not going to achieve a just transition. And so I guess the other major insight that I would bring into our conversation too is just, again, coming back to the notion of gender champions in this work. And again, this was one of the critical pieces that we all had to write into our research grant applications about how we had to identify a gender champion. In our case, we identified two, one who was an academic, Jeff Masuda, who has a lot of experience in the institutes of health research, particularly the Institute of Gender and Health. But we also partnered with the Native Women's Association of Canada, and that by having them co-leading the gender championing role, again, remembering that 50% plus needed to be identify as Indigenous, 50% plus need to identify as women, that really amplified our ability to keep gender at the front of our agenda, at the front of our conversations. And I just wanted to drop into the chat that you can find the Native Women's Association of Canada's new CRGBA roadmap. It's available in both English and French now, for your own inspiration and your own work, if there's people from policy and advocacy groups on the line. And when we began our research projects together, one of the things that that came about was by focusing on that work, those are some of our key contributions programmatically about gender. The other piece to that is that in looking at the projects that we had identified, we found the need for elevating and amplifying Indigenous women's voices in this sector. And so we created a whole another project that wasn't part of our original proposal, but that emerged as a result of it. And it was creating safe space for Indigenous women to come together and talk about how does their role as renewable energy champions in their communities, in their work, how does that have an impact on their community, their family, their own health and well-being, and the health and well-being of the land that they are taking care of in their responsibilities as Indigenous women. And so part of the reason that work came about was just a recognition that when you look across the Canadian landscape, we still see only about 20% of the workforce in renewable energy being taken up by women in the industry writ large. But when you look more closely at what does that look like in Indigenous context, we see 50% or more are identifying as women in this area. So there's a real clear leadership and link between Indigenous women recognizing the need to move away from the extractive industries, the heteropatriarchy, the capitalism, the colonialism, all the things that Dee was mentioning. And so that was another, I think, key area of our work. And I'll also drop a couple of the papers that we've published in this area into the chat in a moment. And then maybe the final thing that I would say, and just checking in to see if Dee has anything else to add, but coming back to our governance structure and how important it is to in all of our work, whether it's through that special funding call that we were successful in around identifying as an Indigenous Ways of Knowing project, any research that anybody does in this country affects Indigenous people and the land. And so to change our mindset to think, well, how does our work involve? Well, of course it does. And so to keep that in, sort of front and center in our minds of this work that I'm doing, where historically I haven't thought about that, needs to be thought of constantly, a constant attention to it. And I think the same goes for gender, which is often overlooked. And I saw that at the midterm. We all saw that at Dee and I remember, Margot, you were there as well. At the midterm review of these grants, the gender just wasn't even on the agenda, and yet it was a key focus, as was Indigenous knowledge systems throughout the project. So yeah, I'll stop there and see if Dee wanted to add anything else, and I'll just share some of our publications that relate to the gender piece. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's great to hear this, and there's so much fantastic, leadership from Indigenous women that I'm glad you could tap into that, and of course recognize it and help it flourish more and more. I'm curious in that context, in terms of youth, whether or not you saw there might have been more, force and power coming from some of the women in the youth you're working with, Michael, in that area. But, either way, I still would like to know more about some of the insights that you felt that were sort of new things, might have shifted where you were headed, or, spun off other projects, whatever it might be. Are there some things you want to share with our audience?
Wow, this, because there's so many threads off of what we just heard. It's, there's so many ways to go in multiple directions. Because a large part of our research in both communities in South Africa and Canada, of course, was, and well, as you know, it was focused on young women's experiences in these industries, and indeed these family systems that were heavily influenced by these oil and gas industries. We've written extensively about that as well. Maybe though, we had sort of decided that Lowell and I had decided that we were going to sort of parse the questions out. So I'll let Lowell answer in the next round about impact. I'll just talk a little bit about results then, if you will. The major focus, some of the innovations of what this specific kind of funding allowed us to do was to advance a much more sophisticated idea of mixed method designs that were, and multiple data sources that we were able to gather. We were able to bring in environmental science indicators alongside psychological science indicators, alongside industry. So we have literally charts that do take macroeconomic data on the world price of oil and the influence that such a thing has on family dynamics, on educational choices of young people, mental well-being, mental health. We combined that with transect walks, a technique that was borrowed, that was actually adapted from our colleagues more in South Africa, and in terms of how people move through the geography of their communities and interact with the green spaces, the blue spaces. But we combined that with satellite data as well. So what we began to do was try and figure out how do you create a conversation about the multiple protective factors and indeed the multiple risk factors at multiple systemic levels that are all in the same conversation, because that's not typically how science is done. We tend to be in our silos. So a big outcome of our work has been to figure out how you analyze multi-systemic data where the scales are quite different. And fortunately, we've had some really innovative thinking going on that's ongoing in terms of network analysis and advances in computer analysis, as well as innovations in qualitative use of the data as well, and comparators, even to the point of people from Drayton Valley going to South Africa. We wanted the South Africans to come to Drayton Valley. It was not possible. There's a whole bunch of socio-political reasons for that. It was not for lack of effort. So you begin to get into these conversations about, the magnificence, I think, of this particular grant. And if I could echo someone said about the length of time we had, was that we could collect very complex data sources from multiple sources, engaging communities, and then feeding that information back to communities where they could actually use it. I'm going to actually pause there because I know that Lola has a whole lot of stuff about the impact of this indeed on women as well. But I feel like, Jeff, you wanted to ask that question next, so I'll pause there.
Yeah, Lola, you want to expand a little bit, or if not, yeah, well, certainly can emerge again. And I like how you, Michael, brought up again the length of the EHSI, and coming originally from working in government where we can work longer on certain things and it's not always tied to a grant beginning and ending. I hadn't really fully appreciated the value of that longer grant period. I think that's something that's going to have to be brought forward as we go along. We're really hearing so many amazing things, and of course chewing up our time fast. So I might have to try to jump ahead in some questions. But if I look back to to Margot and Sandra and Raina, there's one of the questions I want to get on now was perhaps still linked in with insights as sort of how thinking might have changed in your project, but maybe we combine that more with some surprises that you might have come upon in the project, or challenges. We heard about sort of the challenges of complexity and succession being something that we always have to deal with, and hopefully come out stronger as a result of it. But are there some surprises or maybe some challenges that you felt you overcame that
Yeah,
put you in a better
thanks.
place?
Thanks, Jeff. I just wanted to mention it's really nice in these contexts, given the contextual nature of this work and the different lands and territories where these topics land. I'm getting in my imagination, imagining some of these places that people are talking about, where these quotes are coming from. It's just really nice to hear where you're calling in from. So thanks for doing that. And the one of the core aha moments, it's not you have insights and then you deepen them in a work like this, especially when you can turn over on you can go through a couple of cycles. And so I'm going to lean into a couple of those. At the core of it is that if we are to strengthen capacity to address the health impacts of resource extraction and development, this demands new integrative ways of thinking that can take us beyond the harmful, colonizing, degenerative, and unjust patterns that are out there. So these are insights we had at the beginning. They resonate with insights that Dee and others are sharing. But there were moments when you felt like, we've started to move. And one of those was the youth engagement element of this work, which was always an interest for our team, but it emerged really naturally when we launched our project. We engaged with School District 91 in Vanderhoof, Northern British Columbia, and that school kind of took us on and said, we don't want to stop these conversations. We're part of your first conversation, so we want to be at your next annual meeting and your next annual meeting. And so this youth engagement then has fueled and invigorated so many layers of the project. And this is not, we'll have youth as participants. This is people that we might interview or something. This is youth coming to our annual meetings, speaking from their places, taking us to their places, leaning into the issues that they want us to think about. And often we created a dynamic where they had the youth engagement, the youth that were part of our annual meetings, for example, would have a kind of a huddle, and they would bring back some provocations into the team. And what we found is that it elevated the tone of our conversations and lifted us out of our stuckness. It wasn't just a chirpy hope thing. Hope in its deep sense of inspiring people to go beyond where they're stuck was a real element of this work. So that was one, and I'm going to ask Angel if we can paste in the neat paper that just came out about learning from and with and from youth. And that was led by youth members of our team. And the youth piece then fueled our early career researchers. The early career dynamics in this team was really important as part of the strengthening capacity. What an extraordinary group of early career colleagues and our next generation colleagues that we've worked with. And that pushed us to lean into some other aha moments. And we entered into this project with a recognition that we had Indigenous colleagues in our team, but that wasn't sufficient. This was not the kind of governance model that Dee and Heather have leaned into, but our work was deeply Indigenous informed, and we were pushed all the way through to do better. So that learning, exactly the learning that you mentioned, Heather, which is this needs to be part of all projects, and we need to continually do better. We didn't have it figured out. We still don't have it figured out. But one of the big shifts was to say, let's stop trying to do echo things and harness echo to support Indigenous-led things. And that was when things really started to shift. And so when we're at one of our final meetings, I've got the photo of it behind me. I can channel the moment. We're in the Cowichan tribes territories here. And earlier, the day before, we had been at an extraordinary event that we co-designed, co-hosted, and supported. Kudos to one of our early career colleagues, Angel Kennedy, but the youth that came to this gathering, we were co-led with Chief Lydia Whitson and Dr. Shannon Waters in Cowichan Tribes territory. We wanted to bring the integrative environment, community, and health impetus to things that were already happening there. And it was a totally different kind of conversation where we managed to bring in the people. We were very much closer to the seats of power in the Cowichan Tribes territory than we are in Northern BC. So we had ministers coming up to participate in those conversations, and we went to the land, we went upstream through this watershed, talking about the themes and environment, community, health issues that also had leveraging off what was a powerful, in its own right, a powerful Indigenous-led event that ECHO supported. So that was definitely an aha moment, and one that's now feeding into how we are working with others. So another example that I might put into the chat box is how that happened in Lheidli T'enneh territory where I work, where we partnered with a Land Health and Healing series, and we were able to fuel some really fantastic Indigenous-led work that was we were in conversation with it. It was not ECHO's work, but ECHO was finding ways to support and elevate, honor, connect, and amplify things that are already happening. And so that felt really powerful, and it's shifting us in terms of how we now think about really moving beyond just having a knowledge generation process to moving. One of our phrases was take notice for action. And the take notice for action idea was that we're wanting to find where the action pathways are. And another thing that flipped us into action was often the arts-based and narrative approaches that wove through our projects. We partnered with the UNBC Health Arts Research Centre, but every regional case ran with that. They used arts-based approaches to allow things to come together as a whole in ways they hadn't possible previously. Even our logo that we might, if you go to our website, you'll see it's got a sort of a pulse of sound. And one of the extraordinary team members who was progressing her graphic arts skills, Annika Chiasson, who's now the executive director of New Brunswick Environment Network, made this logo, and it's the sound of us saying take notice for action. And so it kind of rings through us. The circle of take notice for action is echoing literally through our efforts. So yeah, those are some initial thoughts, Jeff. It's hard to keep track of time when you're answering these big questions, but I hope that's a good starter.
Yeah, sorry, I'm glad you guys all appreciate the questions. There are things I really wanted to hear, and hopefully gave you the opportunity to talk some more. And one of the things, just ad-libbing a little bit here, is youth, and certainly youth and Michael's project with Lola is what's this like, and how youth really wanted to be part of it and really embraced it. But is there a sweet spot for age in youth? Are you talking about under 10, teenagers? College, university age? Was it the whole spectrum of ages?
Of course, the answer to that is that it's context specific and relationship specific, because that's what drove it. Is that when we were in New Brunswick, we were with elementary and elementary level school kids. Other context, we were working with secondary schools. Other context, it was this really fascinating nexus point between youth. In some ways I shouldn't be talking about this. There's others in our team but we're the youth from high schools and younger sometimes we're interfacing with our early career colleagues, and that was really a fertile interaction that then elevated the provocations coming forward. So we've had a whole team figuring out how to do those things. So and being open to the unexpected outcomes. It's like we've written in other contexts about arts-based and narrative and storytelling pieces are not about it being a nice, cute, neat package. The purpose of art is to provoke us to go beyond where we're at. It's elevating the conversation. So you have to be willing to go outside of your comfort zone and be taken in directions that the meeting, I've got it behind me, where there was a moment just prior to this where an Indigenous youth from Cheslatic Nation in northern BC was bringing his story into our conversations in a way that it was one of those moments I don't think many of us will forget, because it was all the story of cumulative impact, all the story of making things that are unheard heard, all the stories of a projection to the future of Indigenous leadership that was spurring the kinds of conversations we need to have. And yeah, there was tears, there was a lot of things going on in that circle. And so, yeah, I think that the being willing to see this is not a population, I think, Jeff, and I don't think that's what you were asking, but that's really important, that this is about relationship-based learning that crosses generations and makes us imagine the future and many generations to the future, 7 generations and beyond. And that also gets us thinking about all our relations. It gets us thinking about interspecies equity. And to Heather's point, I do want to just give a shout out to the And all of the tools and processes we were developing, whether it's the eco screen and other things, we'll put some papers in, this equity theme, and how can we tell the stories, not just in a correction mechanism, but we can elevate the assets of the unheard work and bring that into our project. We had to work really hard to be willing, to deliver on our willingness to listen to that. And that's you can say you're willing, but you've then got to deliver it from an operational point of view, and from a research design point of view, and from a how are we going to respond to the kinds of provocations we're getting, so that it's about reciprocal boundary crossing. It's not we have fancy ideas and other people will suddenly do something with it. It's the conversation and the provocation from the health sector, the environment sector, communities. So youth elevated that from their contexts in ways that was really, really profound, I think, for the team.
Right. Oh, that's yeah. I can picture how that can really work. You mentioned, obviously futures and everybody sharing them together, and so we can turn to, Heather and Diana, and thinking about shared futures, and maybe you want to take off a bit on the youth, but again, sort of the question was more around some changing in thinking, and Marguerite just clearly said thinking has to change when you're elevating others' work. Are there some surprises or things that changed along the way, Heather, Diana, that you want to share?
I'll start, Jeff. I do want to mention in our project that we started an international advisory that we hadn't included the youth on, and we invited the youth to participate, and it contributed a lot to the work that we did at the International Advisory Committee level. And not only that, gave the youth a lot of exposure at that level. And we also held a sustainability workshop in Tobic First Nation with elementary school children to sort of trigger the youth interest in taking the discussion about renewable energy and climate change back to the parents in the home. So I just wanted to mention that. Some closing comments, and Heather, if I overlook anything, you can wrap it up. But I just wanted to say that in our project, we realize that reconciliation is hard work. But we're nowhere near where we need to be. And that we've only taken a small step towards reconciliation. I want to say that there's this recognition that Indigenous knowledge is valuable to these processes, but from what we've seen with the projects we've been working with and with our interaction with industry, government, is that, and consultants in this case, that there's still a lot of performativity in valuing Indigenous knowledge. We don't see it taken up in program and policy. We don't see UNDRIP being taken up. It's given a lot of lip service. It's important for business and government and industry and consultants that the work they are doing can have health impacts on Indigenous communities. And I don't think that connection is made. I want to say that in the way that it's impacted me is the work that I'm now doing with Indigenous communities and taking an Indigenous-led approach in bringing Indigenous knowledges into how assessments are done around impacts on Indigenous people's health. And in closing, what I would say is none of this research would have happened without the willingness of the communities that we worked with to engage with us. The people we work with know that we are trained to be responsive to their priorities. And we just want to end by expressing our gratitude that they allowed us to work with them. Heather?
I think that is a good place to conclude our comments on a shared future. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's, and credit to you for really building that trust and, being genuine and you're working with them, and the lasting relationships I'm sure it's gonna allow. looking at Michael and Lola. Sorry, you guys are always at the end of these questions, but definitely want to hear more about any of the surprises or unexpected challenges, changes in thinking. You with being youth is a key part of it. Maybe you have more to say about those interactions and their roles, or again, the family perspective that was mentioned before, because these are whole families that are sometimes dependent on the industries.
I would have to say from a community level that youth have been key to this whole entire project. By involving the youth voice was heard throughout the research. We also had a Rise to Action committee, which consists of youth, which I'm just going to comment about sort of from my perspective, the sweet spot, I would say for the youth engagement piece is that 14 to 25, because they can bring forward really meaningful and challenging issues about what they see for their future in communities that are entirely dependent on oil and gas. They brought forward challenging issues about, what opportunities are available for us in the future if we don't want to be in oil and gas. They brought forward, will there even be a community here for us without oil and gas, looking towards the future, because everything is so completely intertwined with the economy here, the oil and gas industry here. They sort of forced community leaders to think about those things, and they're uncomfortable conversations, because I just want to note, whenever we have these conversations, we have to recognize that there's going to be some resistance, especially in communities in rural Alberta and other places. It's ingrained in the culture, so there is some resistance. However, whenever there's young people coming forward and saying, hey, we need to talk about these things because these things are going to impact our future, it's been really meaningful. As a result of the research here now, those conversations are going to continue to happen from a youth perspective, because town council, for the first time, although they've been approached before, we are going to have municipal youth advisory council to town council now. They're taking all the research results, they're taking feedback from those difficult conversations that were had in the big community discussion, and they're going to continue with those. So I guess just on a final comment from me, from a community perspective, a surprise to me was that recognizing that the resistance that could come from these conversations, that by bringing along folks from the industry along the way throughout the last several years, one of the biggest champions here now for this project, in fact, is from one of the biggest oil and gas, well, the biggest oil and gas company in Drayton Valley. He is excited about the project. He's excited about moving forward. And he's now talking about, what, we've started to make some changes in the way we do our business, recognizing that young people need work-life balance, young people need other things. It's not all about the industry. So did you want to add anything, Mike?
That's a good surprise. I like that one. Michael, you're muted.
All right. No, although I think you said it fabulously well, and probably also, if you actually came and saw what the youth have been doing, the whole community, there's lots of evidence of that work. The youth have been engaged in action-based sort of research outputs, and whether it's next to the Tim Hortons drive-through, these massive billboards that all represent the research outcomes, trying to translate them back to the community.
Wow.
The new town council, the new youth councils, the shift in the way the resources, the spaces that are being created for young people, largely based on, this was meant to be applied research. And that was largely, it wasn't me doing that. It was largely through people like Lola. And if I had my colleagues from South Africa here, they would talk about the dramatic influence in their communities of those same youth councils, including the oil and gas companies changing some of their practices around hiring, outreach into the communities. Small little concrete example, Sasol, this huge conglomerate of oil and gas companies, used to only fund scholarships for young people in this township, incredibly vulnerable community, to go into chemical engineering and like industries, so that they would then have jobs with them. And we convinced them over the last few years through dialogue, don't do that. For community sustainability, you really need to fund all kinds of scholarships for young people to pursue health professions, social pursuits, arts-based things, not just chemical engineering as a university or college degree. So, you know, it's a patient, slow process of getting young people's voices represented right at the boardroom table as well, to kind of create this shift. And that's happening on both sides of the communities that we're involved in. So
that's, yeah, okay. I'm really seeing that now, and I'm hearing, you know, across all of you, the action, the word action, and the feeling that it has there. And I think that's definitely something that would resonate with youth. Okay, we're cutting into question time, which is fine, because I think we're answering a lot of questions as we go along, and you're sharing so much great perspective on things as we go forward. If we were to sort of think about, you know, you going home at the end of the day after dealing with complexities and challenges, and the excitement of the circle that you talked about, that you had, Margot, how do you communicate this work to your friends and family, and what you're doing that can get them excited about it? Let's go back to, I guess, to Margot or Sandra or Raina. You know, this is kind of the typical, what's the little plain language way you describe her at the elevator pitch, you know, because these are not easy things to talk about. You know, what was your progress? How did you learn? What's your research about? Are there some real simple ways you communicate it?
Well, I think we're going to need to, this is probably leaning into your other question around key messages, Jeff, is it? That, but I'll just begin with that responding to friends and family. I mean, one of the things that people ask about this project is sort of, why do you want to focus on something that's, you know, this is so hard and it's so messy. And one of the things that I would that we've really said, that by understanding things together, by putting things back together again, you can not only understand cumulative impact, so that can be mostly framed in a hazard kind of orientation of how things are converging over time and over places to create compounding negative, harmful processes. But the same integrative thinking, if we've found in this project, helps us to understand co-benefits. It also helps us to understand how we can actually move to understand what actions could create the kinds of connections that are going to see wins for health and environment and community altogether. So I think it's just sort of encouraging when people ask questions about sort of moving beyond that sort of stuck either or thinking that research is just going to get you to understand the problem. And in its true sense, the knowledge to action tone we've had it starts to lift us into saying, okay, we're also moving into how to find the pathways, and building those relationships throughout rather than waiting till the end means that you've actually got change is happening all the time in a really genuinely integrative project, rather than you do your research and then eventually you tell some people. So it's I think when people when they're confused about the complexity, it's encouraging people to think differently about what research is learning, and learning with the people that need to know about these issues, and enabling everybody to be better positioned to progress change. But I'm sure Sandra and Raina, if we are leaning into those kind of key messages pieces, Jeff, I know that Sandra and Raina had some other thoughts to think about.
Yeah, thanks. You know, in terms of our time we have left, so definitely if you want to blend in some key messages with this sort of way you talk about the work to friends and family, that'd be great, because we're down to about 9 minutes. We could go on a lot longer.
I'll be really brief here, Jeff. Thanks so much. So just to add to what you had to say there, Margot, you know, well, first and foremost, my friends and family already know not to ask me questions about my work, because I won't stop. So there's that. But with regard to the ideas that kind of arose from this, and excited things I tell them about, really is, you know, the growth of the network, the succession, the capacity building has really resulted in a beautiful distribution of learners that are now leaders, and new learners under them, really developing competence and confidence in complexity. And I think that that's something that's really, it shows, you know, we've got our team members, many of them here, you know, presenting at provincial and national tables about the work and sharing that good work and people following up on that. And so those are amazing outcomes that I'm excited about, that I would be sharing with friends and family, because of course it is this collaborative space where we all come together and bridge these sectors, you know, and maybe we're engineers and bridge builders more than anything else here. So thanks for that.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, I want to, Raina, are you okay if I jump and get Heather's perspective and Diana's perspective?
Certainly.
I want to make sure we all can talk about this and you know, any other key messages you want to talk about. And again, you know, this conversation is really, I hope, you know, an advertisement for others to you know, come and learn more. And you've all done a fabulous job of using the chat to get more stuff out through that way, which is great and effective.
Sure. Go ahead.
Heather, I was just going to say, Heather, why don't you go ahead? I had my last word, the previous question.
All right. Yeah, I was hoping we were going to take some questions, but I guess the main messages that I would say is that throughout our research program, there's been unexpected challenges around data governance and research autonomy, and certainly some, you know, of how coloniality works even within our own research program, and how we worked through it in relatively unconventional ways. They were more than intellectual exercises. It was relational work that we engaged with, and working with a good heart and mind across the changing socio-political landscape that we're working in, with the people on our team, with communities that are asserting autonomy. And I guess it's just really surprising to us that, well, we might all be talking, you know, since 2015 about truth and reconciliation and healing, different ways of thinking about and engaging in decolonizing work. It's really, it's such a baby step forward in where we're at. The decolonization process is about undoing colonization, and it involves continually changing existing policies, practices, and structures. And I think that's where A Shared Future is making some important contributions, that especially in the business sector, that was a bit of a surprising turn, that we're really focusing our efforts on how important this work is with business, government, industries, and consultants, and challenging them around the importance of the work that they do, how it's affecting Indigenous peoples and their lands in terms of health and well-being. And in some instances, we're seeing really positive signs, and in others, we're not. You know, a national clean energy group that withdraws its data because they're uncomfortable with the critical lens that we're taking in what decolonization means. It's frustrating. But again, I want to come back to Dee's final word about how this work would not happen without the involvement of Indigenous peoples, and being in the driver's seat around our projects was critical, that we weren't driving the bus as academics, but that the communities that we and organizational partners that we were working on with were doing that, and we were taking their lead. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. You know, I do see the environmental justice themes are going to only grow and grow, and you're in a good place for that. Let's jump to Michael and Lola in terms of some of the key messages you might want to leave everybody with, whether it's in a simplified form you would tell your family and friends, or something more technical. But it'd be great to hear how you sort of wrap this up.
Lola, do you want to go? I've spoken more.
I think I said what I need to say. I guess I feel like it's the end, but it's only the beginning. So if we could continue this work, it's exciting times for us here, thanks to this project.
Yeah. I just say it's a complicated voyage to wrestle with many different dimensions of a very complex set of problems, both social, environmental, political. It's just going to continue to take dialogue, and these grants, I think the message back should be that these kinds of grants are probably effective at raising new conversations, and as we've all shown, maybe anticipating the next wave of where things are going before they become a crisis in the national conversation. So.
Yeah, it's just the beginning, really, but it's such a good space because of this, and to have the ability to change as you hear, and learn more from youth and learn more from the outside groups, and how some are getting it, some aren't getting it. It's all just going to make this so much stronger going forward. Where am I looking at my clock here? We got about 3 minutes left. I didn't really see any questions come up in the chat. I did see lots of compliments and people are happy to be here. Not seeing any questions in the chat. I don't know whether or not I would dare to say if anyone wants to unmute and ask a question. I'm happy to do that. So why don't we see if anyone wants to raise their hand and unmute or anything like that and ask any questions. Yeah, I understand, Heather, getting questions would have been good because then we can learn more from who's out there. Any, I can see now that next step should be a team grant where everybody here becomes one team, because there's so much cross fertilization that could happen there. I don't know what anyone had thoughts on that. Like anything, Michael, you heard from others that's maybe giving you an idea of what you want to do next.
No, well, indeed, yeah, no, there's, I mean, this whole, I think we're riding a way forward that we're seeing just more and more stress on these communities, this conversation about how do we legitimately create that, diversification and moving people, as the economy changes into a more decarbonized one. What's that going to mean socially, politically, health-wise? It's affecting right down to families, children. There's just a lot more questions, and I do think this conversation is going to have to continue to take place. It'll be interesting to see if another wave of funding comes out, or indeed if people can continue to have these kinds of conversations.
I would just add to that too, Jeff, by saying that it was a one-off signature initiative, and why that is still beyond me. That we don't have a dedicated institute at CIHR around environment and health is baffling, especially right now with the climate crisis. This should be, like everyone's research question should begin with, how does my research relate to climate change, and how do I mitigate, not just adapt to where we're at. And I think climate change and capitalism and Indigenous people's rights are totally interconnected, and the fact that we don't have our research really engaging with Indigenous people's ways of knowing, when that's all the evidence that we're seeing out of COP27 and COP15 around how Indigenous peoples are protecting biodiversity, about land defense, that this is still just lip service, and we're not putting our money where our mouth is. And I think that's a major message that I'd want to send to government and policymakers who are on the call. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Heather. I think it's a really good way to put it. I'm optimistic. I think we're in the right place, and with the right questions being asked now, or at least better questions being asked. And so, that'll be day 2 of our summit. How do we sustain this?
And Jeff, just as we close off, I think one of the things I want to really thank this group, but what we've seen here is an example of researchers that have been empowered to not just do the same things better, not just to try to do little things that are going to understand, but this is a group, each of these groups are trying to do better things. And that requires a shift in how we think about research in this topic areas. And it's going to require ongoing investment, as Heather's emphasized. So I'm really glad there's a summit coming up to ensure that how we can do this kind of work that has these sorts of transformations can carry forward. Thanks for having the space.
Yeah, totally agree. This is a wave of the future. So yes, anyone who's remaining, thanks very much for joining. We're going to continue, discussions on the EHSI and some future webinars, and this will be available. So let everybody know that they can tune in, and I think we've had such a rich conversation that's disappointed to cut it off, but I really do appreciate all of your time and look forward to engaging in the summit next month. So everybody take care, much appreciated.
Thanks, everyone.